If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too available, or that you feel everything for everyone, and then one day you wake up numb, detached, or strangely powerful, this video is for you. Because here's the uncomfortable truth Carl Jung warned about. Healing doesn't turn empaths into softer, kinder versions of themselves. It turns them into something most people don't recognize anymore. A healed empath doesn't glow with endless compassion, doesn't rescue, doesn't absorb pain, and that shift can feel terrifying, lonely, even wrong. Many people think they've lost their empathy, when in reality they've crossed a psychological threshold few ever reach. By the end of this video, you'll understand what a healed empath truly becomes, why it unsettles others, and why this transformation is not a failure of your nature, but the final step of individuation Jung believed was necessary for real psychological freedom. What a healed empath really becomes, through the lens of Carl Jung's uncomfortable truth, is not what most people expect, and that misunderstanding is exactly why this transformation feels so isolating. Jung never romanticized empathy. He understood it as a psychic function, a sensitivity to the emotional field of others. But he also warned that any function lived unconsciously becomes destructive. The empath who is not healed lives in a state of psychological diffusion. Their ego boundaries are weak, so they unconsciously merge with the moods, wounds, expectations, and projections of others. They call this compassion, but Jung would call it participation mystique, an unconscious fusion between the self and the outer world. Over time, this fusion drains the empath's life force. They become chronically exhausted, resentful, anxious, or depressed, yet unable to stop giving. Healing begins not when the empath learns to give more wisely, but when they confront the terrifying realization that their empathy has been a survival strategy, not a virtue. Jung believed that many highly empathetic people developed this trait in response to early psychological environments where emotional attunement was necessary for safety. The child learned to read subtle shifts in tone, mood, and energy because not doing so had consequences. This hyper-attunement later becomes an identity. I am the one who understands, who feels, who carries others. But identity built on adaptation is fragile. As the empath matures, life begins to expose the cost of this role. Relationships become one-sided. Boundaries feel cruel. Saying no produces guilt. And beneath the surface, the shadow grows, filled with anger, envy, bitterness, and an unspoken wish to be free. Jung insisted that healing requires meeting the shadow, not repressing it. For the empath, this means admitting the parts of themselves that do not want to care, that want distance, silence, and autonomy. This is where the transformation begins. As the empath moves toward individuation, Jung's term for psychological wholeness, they stop defining themselves by how deeply they feel others. Instead, they begin asking a dangerous question. What do I feel when no one else is present? At first, this question brings discomfort. Many empaths discover emptiness, numbness, or rage where compassion once lived. This does not mean empathy has disappeared. It means it was never integrated into a solid self. Healing requires withdrawing projections, reclaiming emotional energy, and tolerating the anxiety of separation. Jung described this stage as a kind of inner death. The old identity dissolves. The empath no longer gains worth from being needed. And this is deeply unsettling, not only for them, but for everyone who benefited from their self-abandonment. A healed empath becomes someone who can feel without absorbing, understand without rescuing, and witness pain without making it their responsibility. This shift often looks like coldness from the outside. Friends may say, "You've changed." Family may accuse them of being selfish. Partners may feel abandoned. Jung would say this reaction is inevitable because the healed empath disrupts unconscious dynamics. They no longer play the role of emotional regulator for others. They stop buffering conflict. They stop soothing discomfort that was never theirs to carry. In Jungian terms, they stop being a container for the collective shadow of those around them. And when the container disappears, people are forced to confront their own inner material. This is why a healed empath often becomes a mirror rather than a sponge. One of Jung's most uncomfortable insights is that true compassion is impossible without boundaries. Pity, over-identification, and emotional merging are not love. They are ego strategies that avoid the pain of separation. A healed empath understands this viscerally. They no longer rush to fix, advise, or console. Instead, they allow others to experience the natural consequences of their choices. This does not come from indifference, but from respect for the psyche's need to grow through struggle. Jung believed that interfering too much in another person's psychological process robs them of individuation. The healed empath finally accepts this truth, even when it feels cruel. As healing deepens, the empath's relationship with empathy itself changes. It becomes selective, intentional, and grounded. They feel deeply, but only when it aligns with their values and capacity. They no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. They no longer chase emotional depth as proof of connection. Instead, they prioritize clarity, reciprocity, and mutual responsibility. Jung would say the empath has moved from the feeling function being dominant and unconscious to being integrated and conscious. This integration brings a surprising side effect: strength. The healed empath often becomes calm in crisis, firm in conflict, and emotionally sovereign. They can sit with discomfort, both theirs and others, without collapsing into it. Another radical shift occurs in how the healed empath relates to solitude. What once felt like abandonment now feels like nourishment. Jung emphasized the necessity of solitude for individuation because the psyche needs space to hear its own voice. The healed empath stops fearing silence. They stop filling space with emotional labor. In solitude, they encounter their true self, not the adapted self shaped by others' needs, but the authentic core that exists independent of validation. This encounter often brings grief for the years spent overgiving, but also a profound sense of liberation. The empath realizes they were never meant to be a vessel for everyone else's emotions. They were meant to be a whole person. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of this transformation is that healed empaths often become less nice. They may speak more directly, tolerate less nonsense, and walk away sooner. Jung would not see this as regression, but as maturation. Niceness is often a defense against conflict. Authenticity requires the courage to disappoint. The healed empath understands that being liked is not the same as being aligned. They no longer trade their inner peace for external harmony. This makes them harder to manipulate, guilt, or shame. As a result, manipulative or emotionally dependent individuals often disappear from their lives. This is not loss, it is psychic hygiene. Jung also noted that when a person integrates a once dominant function, another function rises to balance it. For healed empaths, this often means developing discernment, logic, and self-trust. They stop doubting their perceptions. They stop explaining themselves excessively. They trust their internal signals, even when others disagree. This grounded confidence can feel alien to those who remember the empath as endlessly accommodating. But this confidence is not arrogance. It is alignment with the self. Jung believed the self is not moralistic or sentimental. It is oriented toward wholeness. And wholeness sometimes requires saying no, leaving, or standing alone. Ultimately, what a healed empath really becomes is someone who embodies compassion without self-erasure. They care, but they are not consumed. They love, but they do not disappear. They feel, but they remain rooted in themselves. Jung's uncomfortable truth is that empathy, when unconscious, is a wound. But when integrated, it becomes wisdom. The healed empath no longer needs to prove their goodness through suffering. They understand that their value is intrinsic, not earned through emotional labor. And this understanding changes everything. If this message resonated with you, it may be a sign that you're not losing your empathy. You're integrating it. Healing doesn't make you colder, it makes you whole. Carl Jung's uncomfortable truth reminds us that real growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. If you're ready to continue this journey of self-understanding, individuation, and psychological depth, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need to hear this today. Your healing matters, and this is only the beginning.